Hi, thank you so much for inviting me for this great opportunity to share with you my perspectives on humanitarianism and love. Particularly, I think at this time of great crisis, where if we look at the world, I would suggest that the temperature of love is pretty low. So I'm here from Médecins Sans Frontières. We are an independent medical humanitarian organization. We are working in over 70 different countries. We have over 65,000 colleagues working for us around the world. And we respond to populations in distress who are impacted by natural disaster, by conflict, by epidemics, and also to populations who are excluded from healthcare because of their circumstance, for example, refugees. In 2024, you can see the types of work that MSF was doing around the world. We supported the outbreak of cholera. We responded to those who were impacted by conflict. We treated malaria. Many thousands and thousands of cases of sexual violence in countries like Sudan and the DRC and Myanmar. We continue to work with people with HIV who don't have access to care. And we also worked in Europe, rescuing those who are trying to escape from conflict, from exclusion, and from economic challenge across the sea, and often left by countries to die in the ocean. And NSF is working with other colleagues to ensure that these people, men, women, and children, reach safety and have opportunity. MSF was started in 1971, and it was started by a group of doctors who were working for the International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. And they were responding to a famine in a place called Biafra in northern Nigeria. And the ICRC, a wonderful organization, similar to MSF in many ways, were treating these patients. But these doctors were so angry because the ICRC has a very strict adherence to ideas of neutrality and impartiality. And so they were prevented from speaking out about what was causing these people's suffering. And so they joined with a group of journalists to establish Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, because their belief was, as doctors, we should not only treat the patients, but we should stand in solidarity with those patients and speak out about what they are experiencing. And since 1971, we have grown into this incredibly large organization. And here in Korea, we are supported by over 350,000 individual donors who give us a very small amount of money each month to enable us to do our work in the field. And this is very important because NSF's charter, which we all sign up to when you join NSF, has 5 principles. The first is that medical ethics are at the core of all that we do. We are principally a medical organization, and that means medical ethics guide our work. It means that we must first do no harm, and we must treat anyone who is in front of us. We're also guided by this idea of speaking out to bear witness, so that we not only treat our patients, but we stand with them in solidarity and speak out when they cannot speak out about the situations they face and the challenges that they face. But we're also guided by 3 other really important principles, and that is impartiality, neutrality, and independence. Impartiality means that we will treat anybody. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what your political view is. It doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your religion. MSF will treat you if you have needs. And we're also neutral. MSF does not take sides in conflicts. It may speak out about what it sees, but it won't take sides for one country or one armed group over another. And lastly, we're independent. Independent of government and independent of political ideology. And we're able to do that because 98% of our money, of our resources, comes from individual donors, like I discussed here in Korea. Yeah. We don't rely on government funding. It comes from private donors. In our whole movement, we have over 7 million private donors. And that means we don't have to apply to a government for money. We're not reliant upon a government to say, oh, we'll fund you, but only if you do this. It means that we can respond where we see the need is greatest. And that we can go quickly and respond to people who may be neglected or ignored by others. When I started this presentation, I talked about the temperature of the world's love being low. And really, currently, MSF is responding to crisis, but in a time of crisis. Yeah? We are seeing so many crises around the world, more than perhaps we've seen in MSF's history. MSF is responding to a crisis in DRC, which very recently our international president spoke about at the UN Security Council, where Korea is currently a member. He talked about the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, an ongoing war that is hardly ever in the news in Korea, or indeed in my country, Australia, or in Europe, where millions of people are fleeing their homes, where the health system has almost collapsed, where MSF is treating thousands and thousands of women and children because of sexual violence, where MSF is admitting thousands of people, mainly civilians, into its hospitals with war wounds, gunshot wounds, wounds from conflict, civilians. And we've seen governments talking about a peace treaty in the DRC. The US had talked about this. And yet the experience of civilians every day is a terror, is a fear. Women who feel that sexual violence is just to be expected. And yet none of this is in our news. The temperature of love is pretty low. And in Sudan, Sudan, a country that used to host refugees, a country that has now got 19 million people fleeing violence, 19 million people on the move. A country where recently, in one city, El Fasher, where MSF used to work, in a children's hospital where MSF used to work, an armed group, the RSF, came in and slaughtered over 400 patients and medical staff and their families who were helpless in a children's hospital. Yeah? Did this make the news? Not much. Where is the response? I feel like the temperature of love is way too low. And in Gaza, where MSF has lost 15 staff since October 2023, where we've seen over 70,000 people killed, and probably many, many more under the collapsed buildings that now make up the majority of the Gaza Strip. A hospital system completely collapsed. Humanitarian is targeted. The smell of death everywhere where you go in Gaza. The people of Palestine, of Gaza, have suffered so terribly in this genocide. What is the temperature of the world's hearts about that? And these are the crises that we're responding to, but also in countries like Haiti, in countries like Myanmar, in Bangladesh, where many hundreds of thousands of people have fled to Bangladesh and Myanmar, the Rohingya. To countries like Syria, in Chad, in Iraq, so many countries where MSF is working, where the stories of the patients that we treat are not reaching populations and audiences in other places of the world, because I think the temperature of love is way too low. And we're responding to those crises, but we're also seeing other huge crises that are impacting us. So as I mentioned in Gaza, currently we're not only responding to crises and people who are being targeted and attacked, we ourselves are being targeted and attacked. We're seeing a crisis of international humanitarian law, where it's no longer safe for many humanitarian organizations who are working in the field. In Sudan, in the DRC, in Gaza, and in many other contexts, medical staff and humanitarians are also being targeted. Indeed, this year we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the deaths of 13 MSF colleagues in Kunduz in Afghanistan, where we were bombed by the US military in a hospital where we were treating patients. The space for MSF and other humanitarian organizations to work is getting smaller. We're facing a crisis of international humanitarian law and impunity for those who target and attack medical and humanitarian workers. We're also seeing a crisis in the world as aid budgets are cut across Europe. And of course, most famously, the USA budget has been massively cut. And people who will suffer the most are those in the countries where MSF is working, where children will no longer have access to vaccinations, where women who experience sexual violence will no longer have access to support and protection and care, where children experiencing malnutrition will no longer have access to care. We've seen in countries like Yemen and in Afghanistan, the USA budget has been completely cut. In Bangladesh, supporting the Rohingya refugees, support services for children have been halved because of the huge cuts in aid. And the other crisis upon crisis is, of course, the crisis of climate change. So MSF has always responded to natural disasters, but now those natural disasters are worse and go on for longer. Where we treated malaria, we're seeing a rise in cases because of climate change. We're seeing countries where rising water levels and salination of fields and rivers mean that people can no longer farm and feed themselves. And we're seeing people die from extreme heat, often combined with the conflicts and challenges where we're already working. So not only are we facing many crises, which is the work of MSF, it's within this much bigger story of a world that is facing other challenges. And MSF can respond to patients and respond to the challenge of climate change, but we're not politicians. We can't force the world to lower carbon emissions. We can respond to crises, but we need politicians to help us to ensure that our colleagues and our workers are safe. And we can continue to raise money and do our best, but we're just one organization and we need the support of governments to ensure that there is a robust aid environment so that everybody who deserves support and healthcare has access to what they need. And so that takes me to what Korea can do. I actually first came to Korea in 1998. I love Korea. I did my master's and my PhD on Korea. And it is an incredible country that has moved from a position of a recipient to a donor. You all know the story of your own country. Korea has an empathy with the stories that I'm sharing, with the countries that I'm talking about. And now that it is the 12th largest economy in the world, a country with huge talent and capability, a massive economy, a position on the world stage, it has a great opportunity to use its own experience to bring about change. And I meet with the government often to keep pushing Korea to replace the voices of the US and Europe and to take a lead on the world stage on these issues. And there's also so many very exciting things happening in Korea, particularly in the world of medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics. It's very heartwarming for me to see Korean companies, the Korean government investing so that we can ensure that our patients have access to the right medicines and the right diagnostics in the right place at the right time. Did you know that Korea is the only place in the world making the oral cholera vaccine, which has been critical in the last few years, where we've seen a massive rise of cholera because of planetary health, climate change, but more importantly, because of conflict. Did you know that Korea is one of the leading producers of vaccines for the contexts where MSF is working? And that Korea is one of the world's leaders in producing diagnostics, and not only diagnostics, but the type of point-of-care diagnostics that we can use in the field to support our patients. And that spirit, that responsibility, that commitment is something that I hope all of you will take with you in your careers in the coming years and decades. And so, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Sometimes when I work at MSF, I'm actually motivated by anger, the anger of what I see, the anger of the unfairness. But it's moments like this that I hope, and talking to audiences like this who come to listen to the stories of our patients and our wonderful staff, that enable the temperature of my love to rise a little bit. And I hope that this presentation and these stories will do the same for you, and that you will take that into your futures and in your own way ensure that we can contribute to a more humane, a more just, and more fair world. Thank you very much.